This summer has been wild. A little bit of not practicing what I preach and not really pacing enough, but also everything that I've been doing this summer has been completely aligned with my values and goals for this business and my family. And so this summer is all about getting things done and not perfect, but still, quality and still with care and intention. And if that sounds like something that you also are aiming for in your life and you're a therapist, then I would love for you to join us in the collective, which is my group for therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and registered dietitians who work with people with chronic illness. This is meant to be a home base for you where we have clinical consultation, business consultation, skills classes, and continuing education specific to working with clients with chronic illness. And if you are not a therapist, if you are looking for a support group, my membership, that's $17 a month, welcome to the waiting room, is waiting for you. We have our support group almost every Friday at noon Eastern. And this group is a place to talk about your medical odyssey, what's going right, what's not going so right. And the group is really good at helping each other with medical advocacy, learning new terms and language and ways of communicating with your doctors and all of those kinds of things. And if we get enough interest, I would like to open up another support group that's aimed toward parents. So parenting with a chronic illness, mostly for those of us who are parenting while living with our own chronic illness, more so than parenting a child with a chronic illness. Unless, of course, you are dealing with both, then that's definitely welcome. But this group is specific to the experience of living with a chronic illness and needing to do our parenting responsibilities and learning how to ask for help and build community and just get things done when the world isn't really always working in our favor. So if that's of interest to you, please come join us in the waiting room. Let me know in a DM chat inside the platform that you would like a parent group, and I will be starting that up soon if we get enough interest. So without further ado, here's today's episode, all about what it's like working with a licensed professional counselor who specializes in sports psychology. Kelsey Ruffing is a licensed therapist and founder of Kelsey Ruffing Counseling, specializing in sport and health psychology, chronic illness, and somatic healing. Her work focuses on helping individuals navigate medical trauma, identity disruption, and nervous system regulation through integrative mind-body approaches. In addition to her clinical work, Kelsey is a dedicated advocate for pediatric chronic illness awareness and policy reform, working to improve protections for medically fragile children in the legal system. Her professional expertise is deeply informed by her lived experience as both a person with chronic illness and the parent of a child diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Kelsey has had a clinical doctoral training in primary care and behavioral medicine at some of Chicago's top hospitals, such as University of Chicago Medical Center, and she co-authored a book, Soul of an Athlete, which focuses on various athletes and their retirement from sports, most of which include career-ending injuries. She has been a guest on various sports psychology podcasts and webinars discussing mental health in athletes and sports injury, and she serves on the advisory board for the University of Illinois at Chicago. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to talking about sports psychology because even though I really don't have any history with sports, I didn't play it growing up, not really a big sports fan. However, when I was in graduate school, sports psychology was fascinating to me, and I thought there was so much overlap with chronic illness and the psychology of sports psychology, whether someone was or wasn't an athlete. So I'm just curious, if you can start a little bit with how you got into sports psychology, what your background is like, and then we can maybe start to draw some parallels between the two worlds.
Yeah, so I was an athlete growing up. I played softball and soccer and basketball, and then at some point had to kind of focus on one. So soccer was my primary sport, and I, I lived it, ate, slept, dreamed, drank soccer. So it was definitely, like my childhood, I can just remember tournaments every weekend, like traveling everywhere. And now that I am a parent, I'm kind of thinking to myself, how did my parents do that with 3 kids? Because we were all playing sports. So I ended up, I wanted to play in high school, and my freshman year, I ended up tearing my ACL on my travel team. That was my first injury ever, but it was, my first real serious injury. And of course, you don't really know what's in store for you when you have never been injured before. So, you just go through the motions and you do what the doctor says. And, I had surgery, which, I hadn't had surgery. I mean, I was 14 years old. So that was all, I was just motivated to get back to playing. And then the next year I tore my other ACL. So that was my sophomore year. And then um, after that one, I basically just trained. I joined this training program. I packed on muscle. I really wanted to stabilize my body and make sure, I wasn't going to get injured again. And then I played my junior year finally and had an amazing season. Was so happy with it. And then at the very end of that season, I tore my ACL, my right leg again for the third time, 3 ACLs. And that one was really devastating because you work so hard to come back and then have a great season. And then it just kind of is over in a second. But I think I had a lot of trouble after that. So that was like my longest recovery. It took a full year and they cleared me to play. And mentally, I knew I wasn't there to do that. It seemed like interests were shifting. And I didn't feel like I did before about soccer. So I was going to go to tryouts. I had my bag packed and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to get in my car and go home instead. And I didn't even go to tryouts senior year. So after that, I think I realized like there was a depression part, for a while of like uncertainty of who am I now? And, so I had planned to I went to college at East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. I went for communications. I thought I was going to do like sideline reporting, wanting to be on ESPN. And while I was on an internship, my first year in the summer, I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I had come back home and I was interning in New Jersey with the Trenton Thunder, which is a AA affiliate of the Yankees. And that summer, I met the Yankee sports psychologist. And he just looked super important. He was with the players, everybody knew him. And I just kind of went up to him and asked him what he did. And when he was telling me what he was doing there and what a sports psychologist does, I was like, wow. At the time I had intro to psychology, really loved it. And I felt so much empathy for athletes who got injured and wanting to help them. I thought, oh man, this really resonates with me. Went back to school, changed my major, got a sports studies minor, and decided I'm going to be, a sports psychologist, and just kept going down the road of that because I felt so passionately about it. So it's funny because, you don't really expect what happens to you as like a young teen to come back full circle as an adult. But it's basically how I built my whole career, was off my injuries back then.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense in hindsight. Yeah, it never feels the same. I had a similar experience from the dietetics world and then ending up here. And yeah, I love that that you were introduced to somebody at such a young age and knew kind of this is a path that I can do, and it's not physically demanding, but it still keeps me in this world of everything that I love.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that translate into your work today? Tell me about your practice and what kind of clients you work with and how this all translates there.
Yeah. So um, I started my practice in 2019, and it was actually right before the pandemic. It was like August. And, and then like a couple of months later, all of a sudden we all have to stay home and everybody's actually having a mental health crisis. So telehealth was like, a godsend for everybody. But basically, what I do in my practice is I do see kind of the whole general, anxiety, depression. But I guess I'm kind of more known for sport injury. I have a lot of female ACL tears that come through the office, and really grappling with identity. Really wondering, do I continue? Am I going to retire? I'm having trouble with the retirement piece. And when I was in my doctoral program, I teamed up with a colleague at UIC, and he was doing research on um, severe sport injury and mental health. So I took the female participants from that had ACL tears, and this was all qualitative. I went and basically studied from beginning of being injured to end where they kind of reinvented themselves. How long did that process take? What was that like? What were the common factors between all of them? Basically, when they were injured to doing all that meaning making to revamping their identity, what was going on there? And man, that all comes full circle through the chronic illness too. So, I have a lot of chronic illness and chronic pain that I see in my office, and it's still these identity pieces are very heavy. People are really struggling with adjusting to a diagnosis or adjusting to life with pain, just like adjusting to an injury. And, although they're maybe dealing with different things in their life, they're really dealing with the same thing, which is kind of this existential issue of like, who am I now? What am I going to do, with my life? And what does my future look like? And, in reality, when we look at sport and performance psychology, that's all, adapting to stress, um, adapting to pressured situations, and using, your mind to really um, adjust what's going on cognitively to fit what's going on in your environment. So that pretty much what I see and what I'm
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. I'm curious what some of the techniques and skills are that you use kind of regularly with clients in order to help with that stress related to identity disruption, figuring out next steps, things like that.
Yeah. I use a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy because this goes along with kind of the meaning making piece. So, in acceptance and commitment therapy, as I know um, it's very much values based, right? So, what are your values? Are you living in alignment with your values? And if you're not, then you're probably, having some distress. And when people really focus back on their values, and a lot of people don't even realize what they are. So
Yeah.
once you realize what they are, you can better live in alignment with them. But, a lot of times your physical capabilities, right, become altered when you end up with injury or chronic illness or pain. And that's hard for people because they can't essentially live the way that they were living or would like to live. So, this acceptance piece, I think, is hard for people to understand because it's not so much, oh, I accept this and it's fine. Maybe it's not fine in reality.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't be 25 years old with this crippling disease, but it's more so, I accept that this is happening to me now, right now. And, it's this non-judgmental, this is what it is,
Yeah.
and
How do I make the next best decision based off of
yes,
what is happening rather than I wish what was happening?
right. And I think when people really hone in on reconnecting with values or realizing what they are and how they can still live in alignment with those, it might look different than before, but they're still living in alignment with them. They realize, oh, like this is possible. Like, my athletes who are thinking about retiring, whether it's injury or non-injury, it's, hey, you still are the same person you are outside of sport because you still will be implementing in your life leadership and, motivation and tenacity, all those things that make you who you think you are in sport. You can still be that person outside of sport and bring it to a career or your family or whatever hobby or whatever it is. So I think when people realize that, things get a little bit easier for them. But I also do a lot of somatic therapies that bring that mind and the body together because what we know is that a lot of times people feel disconnected from their bodies. They don't trust their body anymore. It hasn't worked for them. Um, so we have to kind of mend it back together, that connection. And a lot of the times, especially with autoimmune diseases, I see, a lot of this is years and years and years of me not trusting my body and it not working for me. Um, and then medical trauma, and then maybe childhood trauma, and all these things that really disconnect the mind and the body. So I'll use one of them, brain spotting, which is kind of my primary tool, which, um, you know, if you want me to go in on that, I can.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit, but I think sometimes hearing different people describe it is good because it gives you a little bit of different language to understand it. Yeah, tell me a little bit about brain spotting and how that looks and works in session.
Yeah. So, brain spotting basically works while utilizing the visual field. So, I'll have my pointer and whatever is, I guess, bothering somebody, we'll kind of tease that out a little bit, talk about it. And I'll ask them, like on a scale 0 to 10, 10 being the most activated ever, how activated does this particular subject make you feel? And, thinking about it right now, what's coming up for you, give that a number. So people say 7, 8, relatively high. And then I will ask them, okay, where do you feel that in your body? Where can you feel that in your body? So now you're taking that sensation and you're putting it into a place. So a lot of times I get the head, neck, shoulders, chest, um, which is, those common stress areas and anxiety areas. And I'll say, okay, that's 7 or 8. You feel it in your chest. Now we're going to use my pointer, and I want you just to keep your eyes on there, and we just go across the visual field. So if this is my pointer, we're going very slowly across the visual field, and they're just tracking with their eyes. And because sometimes they'll blink a whole lot, or there might be a twitch, or, I'll tell them, hey, if you start to feel more activated at a certain point, let me know. And a lot of times they do. They let me know before I pick up on it. And they'll say, okay, I feel this flutter in my chest right here. So we'll stop on that spot and they just fix on the point. And I say, okay, now that 7 or 8, that feeling in your chest, that flutter, just focus on the point and really just whatever comes up in your mind, just let's process that out. And so I know quiet people sit there and they'll start whatever's coming up for them. I'm thinking about this, now I'm going to that. And I might direct them a little bit, but I'm just letting them process. And it's pretty amazing to watch it unfold, because they either get clarity or answers, or um, they will kind of find the solution themselves. And it's like, the person you better than I know you. You have the answer, and this is a great way to process it out. And what's happening is that's a brain spot. So you can have multiple brain spots, but their brain spot there is allowing whatever's going on in their subcortical brain, the deeper part of the brain where trauma is held, it's allowing it to come up, rather than just talk therapy, which is wonderful, but sometimes doesn't get to those deeper problems. That focus is kind of on the outer part of the brain, where brain spotting gets to the real inner part of the brain. So we can do a couple spots during one session, or sometimes they stay on one spot, but I'm always checking in. Okay, what's your number now? Where do you feel it now? What's it feel like now? And so you're taking their cognitive process and you're meshing it with what's ever going on in their body. And it's reconnecting those pathways so that the mind and the body are getting united more into one than being so separate. So it really works with like your central nervous system and reconnecting it, but also allowing it to kind of release what's in there. We all store emotions in our body somewhere.
Yeah.
And, it's really allowing it to get out. And there's been some real like amazing clients I've had who it's just been unreal. I had one who had a blood clot start in her calf, and she had calf pain that morning, and then it traveled up to her heart, and she actually had a hole in her heart she didn't know about, and it went through the hole and it went into her brain, and she did pass out. She went to the hospital, but she ended up being okay. She had to go physical therapy and everything, but we worked a lot on different like medical trauma and the trauma from that day and the fear of this reoccurring. Um, and whenever we did brain spotting, like the calf was the point of area that would hurt and tingle and had all the sensations. And that's where this trauma was stored. And I just like find it so interesting, that that's that area.
Yeah.
Things worked out really nicely for her. And it's just amazing. And I don't do anything with my clients that I haven't already done myself. So I, going through the trainings and stuff, get to do all this stuff. So if I didn't know that it actually worked on myself, I wouldn't be doing it. But so that's
it brings it brings up a couple of different things. One, like it feels like a really nice addition to, so I'm trained in somatic experiencing, where we do a lot of, the thought connected to the sensation. There's 5 different pieces in SE where you're kind of looking at how thought, sensation, image, affect, behavior. And the being able to have something that your eye can focus on, and which is a little bit different than I think an EMDR, which it's just going bilaterally and you have no control. I mean, sometimes you do have people will have kind of the handheld things where the client can control it, but for the most part, I kind of visualize EMDR as like the light going bilaterally back and forth, and the client's not controlling that. Whereas in brain spotting, that you're allowing them to control when they stop, which I think adds to this layer of safety and autonomy and right. So it gives it this extra tool to kind of focus on in addition to the SE work, which can sometimes, I think, this is also making me like wrapping in ADHD and just for me, like needing this, it's good to have something to focus on. Otherwise my brain can go out all over the place. But that has that element of control, unlike EMDR. Those are the thoughts that are coming up as you're explaining that.
Yeah. And autonomy is one of these. I mean, we know that when people have more autonomy, they perform better, they feel better, they have, their health and wellness is better. So I love brain spotting for this autonomous part. But also people experience chronic pain and chronic illness. Like that's something that's taken away from them, especially in sport injury, like, they have no control over that, and so this gives a little bit more of that control. And we're also moving different ways. Like we're going this way, this bilateral way, but we're also going up, we're going down, we're going near, we're going far. And I also have like eye covering. So it'll be one eye at a time. Like there's a million different things to do with it, which is really cool. And then we pair it with like bilateral beats, the different sounds that help people kind of process a little deeper. So it's really interesting. In my practice, I really try to focus on all the different senses, like smell matters, colors matter, touch and feel matters. Like if you're not sitting somewhere that's comfortable, it's not going to be super therapeutic. So, when we come to I like walking into my office because I'm like, oh, okay, I like being here. And that's a lot of the feedback is like, I feel really comfortable here. I feel like this is, putting me at ease, and your environment matters. If you're walking into somewhere that's very sterile or, the lighting's really bad, it affects your therapeutic process. So I try to make sure that, all of the senses are covered when you're coming into the office for therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really great, I think, connection point to the brain spotting and how that one piece how that relates to chronic illness, the autonomy piece. What other aspects of brain spotting come up that kind of is this direct relation to the experience that we have as people with chronic illnesses?
Yeah. So then this meaning making part is really important. So a lot of times, if people don't necessarily have a particular experience that's activating them, they'll come in with like a question. And sometimes it's why me, like Okay, let's take that. How strongly do you feel in that question of why me? What does that do to you? And if people have these questions, I mean, sometimes I even have, someone who's like, what am I going to do with my life? These real big questions. We try to tease them out with brain spotting a bit, but at by the end of the session, they have answered their question. Like there's some kind of solution of where I'm going from here or what this means for me. And I think what the brain spotting does is I think it allows you to let go a little bit too, to let your brain kind of bring up the things that you push down or you think aren't possible or maybe didn't even know were there. And it allows people to reconnect with their true selves to say, oh, you know what, my purpose might be this, or I might want to, I find interest in this. Maybe I'm going to go down this road because that meaning making part, I think it's really hard for people. Like, if you're in a lot of pain and you physically can't do a lot, what am I supposed to do? Right. And a lot of times that's, either they then join like virtual groups or there's advocacy. There's a lot you can do from the computer, So um, I think it helps people really come up with some answers they've been wanting for a long time with themselves, So it's really interesting to see it work. But I think that's a big piece of the meaning making part and moving forward with your diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. What are some other themes that come up in the therapy room with clients, whether it's sport related or parenting with a chronic illness? Yeah.
Well, there's obviously the biggest things are identity, um, and like future oriented things. Uh,
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see like how the process works. Like there's underlying grief behind all of it, right? There's always this grief and loss of who I was, who I once was, what I was doing before my diagnosis. And a lot of times I get really high functioning, high performing people like the CEO who can't be a CEO anymore, the athlete who can't be an athlete anymore, or, even like moms of small children who now have these chronic health issues who can't be as present. And that's these are really tough situations where there is a lot of defeat. And, that's a human process, that's not poor adjustment, that's real life. And I think just even holding space for that non-judgmental approach of just holding space for somebody and saying, it's okay that you hate this and that you feel this way because they need somewhere to process that first. That's always the first part is like, what are you actually feeling? And, validating that for them because they
Yeah.
don't know other places.
Yeah. Defeat is a big one. And I can see how that, just goes so hand in hand with the sports psychology piece. Not being able to play, being defeated is a common terminology in team on team sports. And can you tell me a little bit more about that kind of internal experience that happens for somebody who feels like they're being defeated? It's not just this game anymore. It's not a game but they're being defeated by some external force or internal happening.
Yeah. Well, and that's where this autonomy part comes into play. Like, okay, well, what do you have control over here then? It's very easy to get hyper fixed on what's going wrong for you. And then it just blocks out all these other things that might be opportunities. So like I think of this like process, we always think healing is like linear, but then there's these, memes and charts and stuff. It's like all these zigzags and stuff. It's the same thing in therapy, right? And being consistent is very important too, right? So you have to do the work outside of therapy. You have to be consistent. Um, and I think the hardest part for people is that first initial hump, like, oh, I got to talk about this really hard thing that comes along, right? And once you talk about that, it feels kind of awful, right? You're opening this can of worms and kind of have to do something about it. But you might have to sit in that discomfort for a long time, right? But I think like feeling defeated, you feel like you've lost something. So in reality, like, how can we change that narrative to, okay, where's my opportunity here? There's always opportunity for something, whether it's to learn something new, do something new, think a different way. And it's odd because what I've learned in all the research is after the meaning making is done, after we've come out on the other side, there's always so much gratitude. Like I have so much gratitude for tearing my ACL 3 times, because ultimately, it's led to so many things,
Right.
because of opportunity. Like if you don't realize the opportunity is there, you're not going to take it. It's not going to lead to anything.
Right.
So
Yeah, and I think it's, I think sometimes a lot of people have a hard time with the concepts around this post-traumatic growth in which, being thankful or seeing the silver lining. And for anyone listening, when you're working with a therapist who understands like what Kelsey's already been saying around, it takes time and sometimes you have to sit in that grief and that discomfort for longer than you'd like. The just like in how she described the brain spotting, like you come to your own conclusions, you also come to your own conclusions about gratitude or what you're getting out of this. And it's not this forced thing that we're doing in session of like, well, you should just see the bright side or you should be grateful about X, Y, and Z. At least it wasn't this or it wasn't that. Like, that is not what this sounds like. It really is through this process. You really just naturally, genuinely come to your own conclusions about how certain things led your life, like without maybe Kelsey, if you're willing to share, like maybe without some of your ACL tears, you wouldn't have maybe what in your life.
yeah, like there's so much. It's actually ridiculous how much I feel like it's impacted my life. But I mean, it's the whole reason for going to grad school. It's the, whole reason for really doing anything that I've done professionally, because I felt passionate about it from the get-go because of that emotional connection to other injured athletes. And that's why, when we talk about just like social support and how much having social support affects your health and well-being for the better. I mean, that's been in research for like decades that is a thing. And what we know is that injury isolates people, chronic pain isolates people, chronic illness isolates people. But yet we have all these groups and initiatives and organizations that are working to bring people in the same experience together. And it's hard to, I think, for people to reach out to do that because they think, well, what if I don't feel good that day? Or, what if, I don't relate or, those what ifs. But in reality, those organizations, those groups exist for a reason. And if that's the way to find social support, and even if it's an online platform, then do it. Right. So there's always that opportunity and connections to be made. But, I just think that support part is so important for connection, healing, meaning making, everything.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think oftentimes, um, sometimes we miss that in these conversations about grit and discipline, and hope and kind of the more emotional resilience of it all. But the community aspect is so important. What are some of your favorite ways to help clients if they don't already kind of come to you with their own community? Or if they do, like how do you help them really gain from their community if they're not really seeing their community as a source of something that they can pull from other than just the logistical help? I think people just think of community like they'll bring you dinner when you're sick or and that's great and all, but like people are also like, but I can't really ask for help when like I need my bathroom cleaned and my arthritic joints are not letting me or something like that.
Yeah, I know. Asking for help is one of the hardest things for people to do. Um, which is like you could go on forever about why that might be. But, I think it's important to to research a little bit. What is out there? Because there's so much out there that people don't realize. There's an organization for every kind of illness, every kind of anything. Chronic back pain is like the leading, one of the leading factors in unemployment right now. So, like, a lot of people are in pain and for a lot of different reasons, but there's a group for everything. And if, people aren't on social media, it makes it maybe a little bit harder to find those things. But I think that's why even just talking about the issue you're having, what your experience is, to whoever, there might be somebody who knows something. Or if you're, maybe it doesn't have to be around what your illness or your pain. It could be around like a hobby you enjoy, like maybe you haven't done in a long time, right? Like there's knitting clubs, there's, chess, there's all kinds of things that people are doing. And when the weather's nicer, it's a little bit easier to get outside, maybe sit for a little while. Even just saying hello to somebody in a park as they're walking by, like, it will make you feel good because there are certain like endorphins that are released and hormones that are released when you're doing something nice. So just like speaking to other people, because you could go days or weeks without having any human interaction when you're in a flare up or you don't feel well. And, that keeps you in this kind of depressive hole and anxiety ridden state. And just breaking that is hard. I think people, get consumed by that and don't know how to break that. And it could be something like a simple conversation with somebody you see walking by, going outside and getting the mail, opening a window and breathing the fresh air, like little things matter. And I think that that's not talked about enough. Like, yeah, you can do big things, you can join groups, you can, advocate, whatever, but the little things like, did you taste your coffee this morning?
Yeah.
We're racing by and we're not really focusing on those things, but that mindfulness, that gratitude goes a long way. Like, hey, the sun's out today, it feels warm. Like, what's that feel like on my face? I mean, those moments keep people in a better headspace.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too with the community aspect, a lot of times one of the things that I work on a lot with clients is this like radical honesty. A lot of times the issue with not knowing how to show up is really not knowing how to show up without getting caught up in like what other people might be thinking, the judgment they might be having, or right. And so I really think one of the skills that has been most impactful in my work is, yeah, like someone might have those judgments. And what happens when they speak those judgments out loud? How do you respond then? Do you shrink? Do you get small? Do you get overly loud and overly angry, like, the drop of a hat? How do you respond in the face of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like adversity or just challenge. And that's the part that I think is really nuanced as well.
Yeah. And it takes a long time, I think, to get to a place where you don't kind of cower in your diagnosis. Because a lot of people do feel shame, they feel guilt, they feel less than, a burden. Those are huge words that always come up. And in reality, it's like, well, like, why? Because we're worried about the other people in our lives who either actually know us or don't. But again, like, who you are is not your pain or your illness. It goes way beyond that. So, not
And
everybody's
somebody,
willing to respond to that positive.
yeah. And somebody might, I think that's the thing, like I to get really, really micro, I think, into this, somebody might think when you're talking about your illness that you're looking for pity or you're looking for, or this is all you think about, or absolutely, especially in your own families. I think that sometimes is the worst sometimes. And so how do you respond when somebody is thinking poorly of you, and do you have this sense of self? And that's part of what I think when we work so much on in therapy is to have this sense of self that doesn't get rattled, it doesn't mean you don't care at all. Nobody likes when somebody thinks poorly of them, but how do you not let that then derail you into like 10 negative thought spirals or behavior patterns because of what this person thinks or says? And so, yeah, we care for sure, but we can't let it drive the bus.
Yeah. And that just makes me think about, CBT and core beliefs. And that
Yeah.
comes up a lot. Is I work a lot with core beliefs, where those came from and how they're popping up now, because chronic illness, chronic pain, serious injury, that will bring those up real quick.
Yeah.
So, all those things that make you feel a little inadequate, it always pops up. I think when you were talking to you, this other kind of thing popped into my head about, when you have a chronic illness that you don't even understand, like you just know that your body feels awful or it's not working the way it should, but maybe there's no real rhyme or reason because they haven't figured that out yet. And then you have family and friends that don't understand. You're like, well, I can't expect them to understand it because I don't understand it. And, you know, there's just all these complexities there when you're uncertain and you don't have answers and the answer you're getting doesn't make sense. Um, but then that's where it's more like, okay, well, coming back to you as a person, right? Like taking the label off of it or whatever the chronic illness experience is, like, who are you as a person? What are your values? Coming back to identity. Um, I think putting things into perspective sometimes, like, that helps people of not going down the rabbit hole of the medical diagnosis or undiagnosis or whatever it is, because by the time they come into the op, it's like, well, I've seen 8 doctors, nobody knows what's going on, and the blood work comes back fine, but I know my body feels like crap. So it's kind of the same story all the time, especially with these autoimmune disorders. Is nobody knows what's happening. And that's a hard place to live in when there is so much, I don't know.
Exactly. To kind of bring it back to the sports analogies, when you are uncertain, I'm sure you can speak to this much better than me, but when you're uncertain and you're on the field, you look around. Well, you have multiple ways in which you can do it. Then I'm sure some of those ways lead to the demise of a team or a play, and some of them work much better in the collaborative, cohesive nature of team building. And so I think about the person who's uncertain on a field looking around, and if they don't know who to trust, they're only going to lean back on themselves, and that might actually work out. I think sometimes that works out in sports in the way that, yeah, you you made the goal, you got the points, but like you still look around at the end of at the end of your game, and then you don't know who you can even celebrate with now. So that's what's coming up for me around this. What comes up for you there?
Yeah, no, that's so true. I do a lot of training with athletic trainers around this and coaches, because in the research, it has come up that the person they trust the most is the athletic trainers, because they spend the most time with them, especially during injury. So when they have an athletic trainer that actually screws up, that does a lot of damage to the process of recovery. And then when you have a coach who basically ignores you because you're the injured athlete, right? Which I could translate that to when you have a doctor who ignores what you're saying as a chronically ill person or doesn't believe you. It's the same process. There's a huge mistrust and a trauma that goes on there. Because this is somebody that you look up to, maybe you respect, that has a lot of power in the game, and your role in it, right? The doctor is going to give you treatment, not give you treatment. The coach is going to have you play or not play. And when you're dismissed, that does a lot to you, and your confidence, your self-worth, and just your thoughts and how you feel. But yeah, I think that part, and that's why, like, I think there is a really important role to play in educating doctors on medical trauma, educating them on what goes on mentally for somebody who's, or, this is the 12th doctor they've seen. What are you going to offer to them? And when their bedside manner sucks, that's when I get people in the office that are like, I don't know what to do anymore. Like, I'm just going to give up.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard. That shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. Absolutely. One last question before we wrap up today. Who do you see yourself as in the therapist chair on their team? Are you the sports the director? Are you the coach? Who are you?
This makes me think of Angels in the Outfield. Such an old I feel like I'm like the person like fluttering on their shoulder while they're out there, wherever you are and what you're doing. Like, hey, remember what we talked about in therapy?
Yeah.
When I'm in the chair, they're the coach, they're the director, they are the person that, is in charge of the game, whether they know it or not, at the end of the day. And that's the goal for them to realize that and to do their own work, in that realm. But yeah, I feel like, no, they're like the center of it. And I'm just playing in the background. Like, I'm just going to sit over here and remind you of all the things you should know that you probably do know already.
Yeah, that you do know, but that it requires a communal, relational, in order for us. I actually think that's so huge, right? Because so many people come into therapy being like, I do already know this, or I should know this, or I shouldn't be back again with this same problem. And whenever I hear that, I think, who's not playing on your team in the role that they should be playing in? Because now you're having to overcompensate somewhere, and that's why you can't quote accomplish the thing that we are talking about on a week-to-week basis. Someone somewhere is failing on the team, and you don't have the bandwidth to play their role and yours. So yeah, that's how I see that.
Or realizing your role and, what are those expectations of the role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts you want to leave people with as we end today?
Just that, there is that other side to things, and you do have to go through the really hard, reckoning, as I call it, in order to get there. So like, you do have to really reckon with the feelings and maybe the misfortune of a situation to get to this other side of that meaning making and of that feeling gratitude for what has actually happened. And it just makes me think of, somebody who maybe was in like a tragic accident and then marries the nurse that took care of them. Like, some things just happen for particular reasons. And you either take the opportunity to make meaning out of it or you don't. And when you don't, you sit kind of, wondering around like the why me phase. And in the research, when people got to the other side and they had all that gratitude, I mean, there were all kinds of unfortunate situations that had occurred, during their injury. It wasn't always just about the injury and the retirement. It was other life things that had gone on that, hey, you know what, while I was injured, when my grandfather died, and it actually allowed me the opportunity to be with him way more than I would have if I was playing. So, just noticing those things and like, what is the universe trying to do here? The universe keeps giving us opportunities to grow, and it'll keep giving you the same situations to do that until you actually learn the lesson and grow. So, there's always hope.
Yeah.
But resilience is a skill. You can learn it. And that is something that carries you through a diagnosis.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelsey. This has been great.
Yeah. Thanks, Destiny. It was awesome being here talking with you.
Thanks for listening. If you learned something new today, consider writing it down in your phone notes or journal and make that new neural pathway light up. Better yet, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram, email me, or leave a voice memo for us to play on the next show. The way you summarize your takeaways can be the perfect little soundbite that someone else might need.
And lastly, leaving a review really helps others find this podcast, so please do if you found this episode helpful. And P.S., clicking subscribe ensures you'll be here for the next episode. See you then.